right off the bat, try to put into words for me, as a United fan, Mark, that has watched the club for over 20 years, how you were feeling when the season was limping to a close. What were your emotions as Manchester United were drifting towards finishing possibly even in 7th place at one stage and missing out on the Europa League? Were you just wishing the campaign would end? How were you feeling?
I think there was a lot of fans that did feel like that, but I think looking a little bit to the future, because I know we're going to do that later, I felt it was really important that we did grab Europa League football. So I was quite content with the result that Brighton provided us with, because ultimately the season just fell flat. I think fans have been very angry over the last 9 years, but I think also over the last 9 weeks, they've almost hit a point where they're not angry. They're just tired and searching for answers as to how this club that we love has ended up in this situation. And I think it does go back probably to the era of Sir Alex Ferguson, but maybe even before. I think the Glazers are probably the tipping point to where this all started.
OK, Mickey, was it the season where Manchester United's muddled thinking became abundantly clear, effectively appointing a guy which was one of the most respected directors of football in German football, but yet bringing him in as a head coach, a job that he'd hardly fulfilled, a role that he'd hardly done over the last decade or so? What he learned, his experiences, is then not going to be used going forward as a tool to get better from, because now they've released him of his contract from being a consultant in the future.
Well, I don't think it was a job for an interim manager at the point when Ole Gunnar Solskjaer left the football club, a cult hero there. He'd been in charge for, 2.5 seasons, 3 seasons, Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, and they needed to bring somebody in who was going to be a permanent manager, who was going to take Manchester United forward. And whether they were waiting, which would be a big surprise to me, for Erik ten Hag till the end of the season, was why he had to fill that void, Ralf Rangnick. But Sam, I have to say, when I walked into his first press conference, and I did quite a lot this season at Manchester City and Manchester United, people walked out and they weren't too impressed with just him and what he was saying.
He didn't hit you hard, didn't he? He didn't make you feel inspired.
And that was the big problem. Whereas I have to say, when I went into Ten Hag's press conference, although his answers were a lot shorter, he had direction. He knew what he wanted from Manchester United. He'd obviously had conversations before he actually came to the press conference. He spoke to the powers that be, but he impressed me. He had this aura about him when he walked into the room. I don't know if you've seen, you probably have, when he shook the hands of the press guys at the front when he walked in. He didn't shake everybody's hands, but it was kind of, right, this is my time. This is the way I'm going to run this football club. But from the end of Solskjaer to the beginning of Rangnick to the end of Rangnick, I think Manchester United supporters could not wait until the end of the season.
I thought it was really interesting there that you started talking about the presence of Ralf Rangnick. You compared it almost to the way that Pep Guardiola behaves in a press conference. You can always look at Klopp as well in that as well. I thought for a long time, Mark, that the lack of structure at Manchester United. Look, I spend a lot of time there. As you know, I'm a guy who lives, 15 minutes from the ground. This is where it's my patch. It's what I cover for talkSPORT more often than any other area of the country. And I thought when you look at the setups at Liverpool, Manchester City, another couple of clubs that I spend a lot of time at, they've got defined processes, defined philosophies, proper structures, a connection with the supporters, and these clubs are winning on a regular basis. What do you feel when you look at that, Mark? Do you feel jealousy, envious, or are you thinking, I'm hoping somebody gets a hold of my club in the same way?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, one of the funny things I would pick up on is that I actually found Ralf Rangnick one of the positives since Christmas, because there's lots to talk about what he did on the pitch, which was very disappointing in relation to some of his favourites. But what he did do, and what disappointed me with the club removing him on Sunday, was that he communicated. He actually communicated with the fans, which the club are so bad at doing. He communicated, he laid out, we need 10 players. He spoke about the lack of passion, the lack of energy. He spoke about trying to bring players in January. So whilst I think it will be beneficial for the club long-term for Ten Hag to have total control, and I was impressed with him, like Mickey was saying there, the way that he's very sure of what he wants. I think that you look at the structure that Rangnick spoke about, and he referenced what you're talking about there. He referenced Liverpool, he referenced Chelsea, because that is exactly what Manchester United need. They need that identity back.
Yeah, but did you feel that he only started to do that when he realised that actually they weren't going to keep him on, they weren't going to give him the manager's job, they weren't going to give him the director of football's role, so he just thought, you know what, it was almost like a little bit of a situation where he knew he was going, he was free, a lot freer to say whatever he wanted, and maybe he wouldn't have done that if they were going to keep him on.
100%. I mean, the clarity on when the decision was made to let him go. There are some United fans that think Erik ten Hag's walked in and said, I don't want Rangnick here. I'd probably agree with you, Sam, that I think that this was an agreement made probably back in March during the international break when he took the Austrian job. And ever since then, it does fit in with what you're saying there. He became more loose-lipped. He spoke more freely about wanting to sign players. I mean, I liked it as a fan, but you don't sit there in front of your employer in mid-April and say, well, I wanted to buy a striker and the club wouldn't buy me one. So it was great to listen to, but you could see it was falling apart.
It's fascinating, right? Because I was speaking to a lot of people at the club. Even last summer, take you back to last summer, I spent a lot of time with people that were high up in that hierarchy at Manchester United, and they thought they'd nailed the structure. They thought that they'd started to reshuffle the way that the club was organised on the football sense behind the scenes. They thought that there was optimism, a vibrant atmosphere, and the additions that they brought in during the summer transfer window had actually given the camp a real kick going into the start of the season. I thought we saw that during the first month of the season, but it tailed off very, very quickly. We'll get into that in more detail in just a second. We'll talk about Ten Hag in detail a little bit later. We'll go back to the future as well and think about what it was like under Sir Alex Ferguson and if any of those lessons can be learned. And we'll go back to the genesis of the problems at Manchester United in the next section of the programme. But Hugh Wozencroft is a Manchester United season ticket holder, or has been, certainly a big Manchester United fan. He's a presenter of some of our kickoff shows here on talkSPORT. He's outside Old Trafford for us tonight. Just tell us what the ground looks like from the outside, because sometimes when you walk up to Old Trafford, especially the first time you go there, it's quite an imposing structure, but then you get inside and realise actually it's decaying quite seriously.
Hi Sam, good evening everyone. Listen, I'm one of those Manchester United fans. I love the walk up here on Sir Matt Busby Way towards the ground. The East Stand just beside me where the sun is now setting as this new dawn for Manchester United begins under Erik ten Hag. Of course, the Sir Bobby Charlton stand, a couple of those names a reminder of that great history of Manchester United, of course. Those great days are what Erik ten Hag wants to bring back to the club. But you're absolutely right. So many Manchester United fans that come here, they want Manchester United to have the greatest stadium in world football. You see what Tottenham Hotspur have done with theirs. And I think people believe that with investment from the owners, and we're going to talk about the owners much, much more, aren't we, that this place should be the place to come and watch football across Europe and across the world. In some ways it is, but I'm very, very biased on that. I sit up in the Stretford end and I cheer on Manchester United. There are sensational fans here. They're always going to support the team no matter what performances are like, and that plays into it for me. I think that makes being a part of Manchester United, being a fan, but those players out there so fortunate, and whoever is in that dugout so fortunate that they will always get that support. But it does need to improve. The team needs to move forward. The ground needs to move forward and improve. And all areas of the club, all areas of infrastructure need to improve. There have been so many changes in roles. The big question for Manchester United fans is really, is anything going to change going forward? I think that's what everyone wants to know. And some of the decisions, some of the rumours, some of what we're reading in the papers, some things suggest yes, others suggest no.
Well, certainly something never changes, and that behind you, where you're standing right now, you're standing in front of the roaring trade of the Megastore, which is closed at present, but I'm sure it's been ticking over nicely over the course of the day. That certainly doesn't change. Hugh's going to be outside Old Trafford garnering opinion for us over the course of the next 3 hours and chipping in as we go. So where did it all go wrong, and what started it all?